Year 3, welcome to your maths video for Friday the 5th of March. So this is a video for you if you've got the Year 3 maths booklet. Now we had some fantastic pieces of work sent in yesterday based on our equivalent fractions. So today we're going to be moving on to completing pages 30 and 31, and we're going to be looking at ordering fractions and comparing them. But before we get onto that, let's start off with our warm-up challenge for today. So today I've got a fraction wall for you, and I'm going to make it bigger in a minute, okay? So on my fraction wall, we can see there, I've got a rectangle at the top. I've got the whole thing there, this purple rectangle at the top. I've got 1 out of 1, I've got the whole thing, and we know we call that one whole. Now you can see as I go down, I've got lots of different fractions, and we know fractions are part of a whole. So I've got a half and a half. If we put those together, they make up one whole, so they're equivalent to one whole. I've got 1, 2, 3/3, and we know 3/3, that's equivalent to one whole. So we're going to be using this fraction wall to find some equivalent fractions for our warm-up. So let's have a look at your task. So the first little task I'd like you to do, using my fraction wall, how many fractions can you find that are equivalent to, we know that means they're equal to, they're worth the same amount as a half, okay? So I'm going to get my pen out. And you can see there, I've got a half there, just that section there. So I'm going to draw that line and draw it all the way down and follow it down. Now if I keep going down my fraction wall from a half, if I go to the thirds, now I know a half is not equivalent to any thirds because look, it's cutting right through the middle of that third there. So I'm going to keep on going. Oh, now a half, that's the same as 1 2/4. So I've already found 2/4 being an equivalent fraction to a half, okay, using my fraction wall. So if you keep on going down my fraction wall, can you find me any more equivalent fractions? That's fractions that are the same amount, they're worth the same as a half. Now if you're up for another challenge, can you then find a equivalent fraction to 3/4? So 3/4, go to the quarters, I've got 1, 2, 3, so there's the line there. Are there any fractions that are the same amount as 3/4? Okay, so I'm going to make my board a little bit bigger for you so you can use that fraction wall to help you. Your main warm-up challenge, can you find me some more fractions that are equivalent to a half? Use that line to help you. So you should have just completed my warm-up challenge in your purple book or on your whiteboards of finding those equivalent fractions using my fraction wall. So today we're going to be moving on to comparing and ordering fractions by their size. That's our learning question for today. Now when we compare something, we're looking at the similarities or differences in it. So if I was comparing the numbers 8 and 6, I know 8 is bigger than 6, and we can see that there with my towers of cubes, and I've used my greater than sign facing the 8 because it's bigger than the 6. Now when we're ordering, we know when we order something we can put it in a range of different orders, but in maths we normally talk smallest to largest or largest to smallest. So you can see here I have the numbers 2, 1, 5, 4 and 3. I've put them in order of smallest to largest, okay? So we're going to be ordering and comparing fractions based on their size today. So let's have a little look at one of the questions that's similar to yours today. So you've got an ordering fractions questions where the fractions have got the same denominator. So you can see here my fractions, they're made up of a numerator, which is the top number, that's how many parts we have. And our denominator is how many equal parts it's been split into, okay? It's been divided into. So my denominators of these 4 fractions are all the same. So when the denominators are the same, we focus on the numerators. Now I've got to order these fractions smallest to largest. So if I'm looking at those numerators, those top numbers, can you see which number is the smallest there out of those numerators? If you said 2, well done. Now 2/8 is the smallest fraction there, because if you think, my shape has been split into 8 equal parts. If I've got 2 of those parts, that's smaller than having 3 of those parts, or 7 of those parts, or 5 of those parts. So I'm going to put 2/8 as my smallest fraction. I'm going to tick it off so I don't repeat that one again. Have you spotted the next biggest fraction? So look at the numerators, which is the next biggest number after 2. Oh, if you said 3/8, well done, because then we're getting bigger. 3/8, I've got 3 parts out of those 8 parts. I've got an extra part now. So it goes 2/8, then 3/8, and I'm sure you've spotted which 2 fractions come next. So it'd go 5/8, and then finish off with 7/8. So we've got 5/8, then 7/8. And we know 7/8 will be the biggest, because if I shade in 7 of these 8 parts, I've nearly got the whole thing. Okay, imagine that, like a big chocolate bar. You would rather have 7 out of the 8 pieces of chocolate than having 2, okay? That means you'd only get 2 squares, but if you had 7/8 of it, you'd get 7 pieces of chocolate out of the 8 pieces. Right, so you'll also notice on your page, you've got another ordering fractions question, but this time you've got fractions that have got the same numerator, but a different denominator, okay? So we're going to focus on our denominators. Now for this type of question, there is a rule, okay? So the bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is. And I know that's a little bit backwards, but if we think about it, I've got 2 cakes here. One that shows 1/5, so I've got 1 piece out of the 5 pieces of cake. And I've got another same size cake, but this time I've split it into 6 equal parts. And I've only got 1 out of those 6 equal parts. Now if we compare the size of those, so have a look at that red section and that red section there, I would get a bigger slice of cake if I took a slice from the cake that's been split into 5 equal parts, okay? So remember the rule, the bigger the denominator, when we're focused on the denominators, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is. So my smallest fraction here is 1/23. That's going to give me a really small slice of cake if I've had to split my cake into 23 equal parts. So then I'm going to look for the next biggest denominator, because remember, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. So that's going to be 1/8. I've done 1/23, 1/8. Then it's going to be 1/6. And our largest fraction, I'm not sure why my board's changed colour there. The largest fraction is going to be 1/5. And we know looks like it's got a smaller number to 23, but remember the rule, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. Another similar question that you've got then is comparing 2 fractions, and we're going to be comparing them to see which is the smallest fraction. So my question here is asking me to circle the smallest fraction. So the first 2 fractions I've got 5/6 and 2/6. So they've both got the same denominator, so we're going to have a look at the numerator. So the smallest fraction, is it going to be 5 pieces out of those 6 pieces of cake, or 2 pieces out of those 6 pieces? It's going to be 2/6. So I'm going to circle 2/6. Going to my next one then, straight away, what have you spotted about my denominators and my numerators? So I've got different denominators, but the same numerators. So we're going to focus on the denominators, the bottom number. Now remember the rule for this. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is. Think about those cakes. If we're splitting a cake into 5 equal parts and then the same size cake into 2 equal parts, you get a much bigger slice from the cake that's been split into 2 parts, okay? So the bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. So 1/5 is going to be smaller than a half. Right, now I've got 1/16 or 1/6. Now remember that rule? We're looking at those denominators because our numerators are the same. I've got 16 and 6. Now the bigger the denominator, well, that's 16, the smaller the fraction. Imagine how tiny your piece of cake would be if you took it from a cake that has been split into 16 slices. So 1/16 is the smallest fraction. So on your page 31 at the top today on question 4, you'll notice you've got a similar word problem like this involving fractions, but I've just changed some of my fractions so they're a little bit different to yours. So we know with a word problem we need to read it through carefully first to understand it. So we've got some children are trying to work out who won the most races at their school sports day. They work out that Hannah won 1/5 of the races, so that means for every 5 races that were ran, she won 1 of them, okay? Ryan won 1/2 of the races, so that means for every 2 races that were ran, he won 1 of them. And Ben won 1/6 of the races. That means for every 6 races that were ran, he won 1 of them. And it's asking us who won the most races. So first of all, my fractions are different to yours, but in my space here, I'm going to put my fractions and line them up together. So I've got 1/5, I've got 1/2, and I've got 1/6, okay? Now, for this, I'm looking for the biggest fraction, okay? Because if we think about this, who won the most races? We're looking for the person who's got the biggest fraction, okay, the biggest part of a whole. So comparing these fractions, what do you notice is the same about these fractions? If you said the numerator, well done. They've all got 1 as their numerator, the top number, so that means they're a unit fraction. So we're going to look at the denominators. So I've got 5, 2 and 6. Now remember our rule for comparing fractions that have got different denominators. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction actually is. So the biggest denominator there is 1/6. I've got 6 as my denominator. So that's going to be the smallest fraction, okay? Then I've got 1/5 and 1/2. Now if I look at 5 and 2, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. So 1/5 is out. So the person who won the most races was the person who won 1/2 of the races. That means for every 2 races that were ran, she won 1 of them. Oh, he won 1 of them, sorry. So it was Ryan who won 1/2 of the races. So for every 2 races that were ran, he won 1 of them. So my answer is Ryan. Okay, so make sure you read that question carefully and get those fractions out to compare them. So what I'd like you to do now is pause my video, complete page 30 and question number 4 on page 31, and then when you're done, come back to my video because we're going to have a look at questions 5 and 6 together because they're quite tricky. So you should have just completed page 30 and question 4 at the top of page 31. So let's have a look then at question 5. So on question 5, we've been given some digit cards. We've got 1, 3, 4 and 2. Now we need to use 2 of these cards to make a fraction which is less than 1/3, so it's smaller than 1/3, but then we've got to use the cards again to make a fraction that's bigger than 1/2, okay? So we're going to be using our knowledge of comparing and ordering those fractions, biggest to smallest. So first of all, let's concentrate on this question. Using 2 of the cards to make a fraction which is less than, smaller than 1/3. Now if we think about 1/3, we're splitting our pizza or cake into 3 equal parts. My denominator tells me that, and we want 1 of those parts, okay? So I've got quite a nice chunk of cake or pizza there from 1/3. So I need to make a fraction that's smaller than 1/3. So I'm going to use 1 as my numerator. So I'm going to have a unit fraction, but my denominator is going to be different. Now remember our rule, denominator, the smaller the fraction, because I'm splitting that circle into fewer parts. So which number here is the biggest number that we can use for our denominator to make our fraction smaller than a third? If you said 4, well done, a quarter. Because if you think about it, if I get the same size cake or pizza now and I split it into 4 equal parts and I shade in one of those parts for 1/4, my piece of cake from a quarter is a lot smaller than it would be for a third. So in your book, from there, could you write a quarter down? Let's have a look then at making a fraction which is bigger than a half. So a half, we know we split our pizza or cake into 2 equal pieces and we've got a nice big piece there, 1 out of those 2 pieces. So half is quite a big fraction. So I know a third is smaller than a half and I know a quarter is smaller than a half. So I'm going to have quite a big number for my numerator. So I'm going to go with 3 for my numerator, quarters. I'm going to put a 4 there because if I show 3/4, I'm splitting it into quarters and I shade 1, 2, 3 of those parts. Look how much of that pizza or cake I've got compared to this half. 3/4 is bigger than a half. So if you want to write that fraction down to complete question 5, and now we're going to move on to question 6. Okay. So question 6 I think is another tricky question, and it's asking us to circle the biggest fraction. Now we've been looking at fractions today that either have the same denominator, so we compare the numerators, or they've got the same numerator and we compare the denominator. But if you have a look here, these 2 fractions, they've both got different numerators and they've both got different denominators. Now if we have a look at those fractions, I've got a rectangle, one that I've split into 6 equal parts and one that I've split into 4 equal parts. So if we drew that out, 2, 6, I'm going to shade 2 out of my 6 parts, there's 2, 6. If I colour in a quarter, I can see from that 2, 6 is actually bigger than a quarter. We can see it from that shape because a 2, 6 comes to there and a quarter stops at that black line there, okay? But to explain this, we're going to have to simplify our fraction. And this is something that you will do when you come back to school when you're in year 4s, 5s and 6, okay? So it's something we haven't done at school yet. So I've got 2, 6. Now if I'm finding an equivalent fraction to 2, 6, I want to simplify it. Yesterday when we were finding equivalent fractions, I said we could multiply or divide our numerator and denominator by the same number, okay? Now I want to simplify it. I'm going to divide my numerator by 2 and I'm going to divide my denominator by 2, okay? So if I divide 2 by 2, I'm left with 1. And if I divide 6 by 2, how many 2s are in 6? 2, 4, 6, that's 3. So on your book, what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to do what I've just written there, and I want you to cross out 2, 6. Because we've simplified that fraction now, 2, 6 is the same as 1/3. And if you have a look, I've managed to get the 2 fractions we're comparing with the same numerator so we can compare the denominators. And I've got 3 and 4. Now what was that rule for the denominator? The bigger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is, okay? So when you come to explain how you know, we know that because 1/4 is going to be cut into more parts. So the bigger fraction is 1/3, and we know that because it's going to be cut into fewer parts than we would for 1/4. We cut this cake into 3 equal parts, but this one will be 4 equal parts. So you can copy that bit down and explain how you know. Now we haven't got a challenge for today because I think our work has been quite tricky today and I know you will have given it a really good go at home. If you're up for an extra challenge though, don't forget to get yourself on TT Rockstars. Now this is our last lesson of home learning before we come back to school on Monday, and I am so excited to have you all back in the classroom, Year 3. You have worked so hard and we're very proud of you. So I'll see you on Monday, take care and have a lovely weekend.